Hey there, welcome to School of Emo, the podcast where we dive into the world of emo, pop punk, and everything in between. If you've ever found yourself in your car screaming the lyrics to Taking Back Sunday, wearing way too much eyeliner in the early 2000s, adding a buckle or a chain to every outfit you've put on, you are in the right place. I'm Erin Judge, and each week I will be your fellow student, guiding you through the music, the culture, and the history that shaped an entire generation of angsty teens. I am not the teacher of this school. I am a fellow student, here to learn alongside you and from you. Together, we will cover a lot of information that doesn't really matter, but will remind us of the days of stalking MySpace channels and getting lost in chat rooms. So connect your dial-up, turn on your webcam, and let's go to School of Emo. Welcome back to School of Emo. I'm your host, Erin Judge, and today's episode is a slight diversion away from emo. I know we've talked about what emo is, the origins of emo, and we've tried to define whether emo is the umbrella or if it's under an umbrella. But today we're doing a deep dive into a band that's more in the kind of post-hardcore, maybe metalcore scene, but has crossed over into the emo space and has become a band that is part of emo communities, cruises, lineups, playlists, all of the above, even if they're not necessarily a traditional emo band. And that is Underoath, aka Locus Ultra, as we will get into towards the end. I'm really excited about our deep dive today because Underoath was one of the bands that I was introduced to early on because of their crossover from metalcore and the Christian spaces. I grew up in a Christian household. I am considered a Christian today. Those are my beliefs in terms of my faith, which I will talk about some in this episode because the Christian faith tied with the realities of the world, kind of the emo experiences that so many of us have had, is something that many people can relate to. And I personally can relate to, and am still kind of going through and discovering and trying to consider today. And so doing the research for this episode and the history of Underoath, the rise, the fall, and the resurrection, I was able to think a lot about some of my own beliefs, some of my own experiences, and how I've related to certain music and why, and just a lot of conversations that I think are interesting that I'm excited to have within my own community, from here on out, which is why I'm doing this podcast to begin with. I love certain music, I love songs, and I want to connect to the voices behind those songs, the history behind those songs, because the appreciation I have for the music grows exponentially the more I learn about who these people are and where the music came from and the scene that was developed, from those spaces, which is what we are here to do in this space. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. And I want to start with the early years of Underoath. And we're looking at 1997 to 2003. So Underoath began in Florida. Not a lot of great things come out of Florida, but music is one of them every now and then. And for Underoath, Ocala, Florida in 1997, 16-year-old drummer Aaron Gillespie decided to start a band with his friend and guitarist Luke Morton. And that band was called Underoath. Now, today, Aaron is the only founding member left of the band. But as you'll see, the chaos and the messiness of Underoath has included a lot of transitioning band members. But Aaron was the start founding member that has kind of carried throughout many of the years. And Luke was there at the beginning as well. So knowing who Aaron is, he was born in Clearwater, Florida, and he was raised in a devout Christian home. So he gravitated towards music at an early age, was interested in a certain space of music that he didn't necessarily see in the Christian spaces, but was coming from a perspective of Christian faith in a household that, believed certain values and certain things and lived a certain way. And that was something he wasn't necessarily sheltered. We talked about that when we looked at the used of how Bert was from a Mormon household, very sheltered, a lot of division because of that. For Aaron, there was room to explore music, explore, creativity and creation and all of those things. But he still came at it from that perspective of Christianity because of how he was raised and his beliefs during this time. Looking at a quote from him early on with an alternative press interview, he said, "I started playing drums in church whenever I was really little, like 6 or 7. I didn't take lessons. I just figured it out by playing." And if you listen to their music and listen to Aaron play, that kind of makes sense. Like he has a creative passion tied to his drumming. It's very unique. And it's not necessarily like classical, which I think a lot of drummers don't necessarily fit into a classical space. But Aaron, was able to just kind of have fun with it as a kid. And that was that open door to what he could create further down the road. Now, singing came much later. We'll talk about where that came from. But in the early days, he was a drummer and he wanted to start a band from that role. He wanted to be the drummer. So by the time he was a teenager, his drumming skills were developed enough to venture into the space of his own band, which is where the local Christian metalcore band that then became Underoath really was birthed. So as the youngest member of the band, Gillespie quickly became kind of the driving force of the band's evolution. He wanted to balance that aggressive drumming that he is known for with more of a melodic vocal that would later kind of define Underoath's sound. And even to this day, the combination of this kind of aggression, almost anger, kind of hardcore, where that metalcore comes from, tied with kind of a melodic, bright airiness, is what makes this band so incredibly special and has helped them really define their own space in this bigger space of emo, alternative, rock, metal, whatever you wanted them to be considered. But they did consider themselves to be a Christian band. And in the early years, they really defined themselves as Christian metalcore. That was kind of their branding. And I think this was around the time where this evolution of what Christian music was, because music as a whole during this time was evolving. There were clear-cut lines around what music was and how people got into the industry, prior to the 90s. But throughout the 90s, like some of those edges got softer. Creativity was a little bit more rampant, and there was a lot less definition to what bands had to look like or sound like to fit within a genre, which makes genres as a whole confusing today. We kind of discussed that a bit in the origins of emo and how, through the 80s and 90s into the 2000s, the evolution of, what these bands could do, what was accepted, and what fans grasped, was influenced by the direct connection between bands and their fans. So it was less about fitting into the record label box, even though that was still really important, but became more about connecting to the audience through streaming and socials and, all of those different spaces. And so Underoath was coming into the space and into the Christian scene at a time where music as a whole, there was a lot of room for evolution. And in Christian music, this is what I grew up with because I grew up in a Christian household, but I loved this style of music. And so I gravitated towards the bands that were considered, quote unquote, Christian bands with a lot harder edges, I guess, and didn't necessarily sound like what I would hear in church every Sunday morning, right? The Southern gospel spaces, that still evolved in its own way, but there also became, open doors for other genres to blend where Christian individuals could create music that they could still define as Christian and influenced by their faith, but not necessarily look and sound like what was before them. And Underoath really was a unique kind of voice within that space in this time period. So their first album, it was their debut album in 1999 called Act of Depression. That was kind of where they entered the scene as that Christian metalcore band. And then their second album, which was released in 2000, was Cries of the Past. And that was a little bit more metal and deathcore influenced than where they started with their first band. And then that was the open door to signing to the record label Solid Slate Records, where they then released The Changing of the Times in 2002. So that was kind of the foundation that they set, with Aaron and Luke coming together, starting this band with some original members, and then what they could build off of. So with the 2002 album, they had Dallas Taylor on vocals. Aaron Gillespie also began singing at this time. So When the Sun Sleeps was a track that he sang on, and this was where he began to kind of blend his role, with Dallas being the main vocalist and in doing more of like the screaming and that role that now we know to be owned by Spencer Chamberlain. And in an alternative press interview, around this album specifically, Gillespie mentioned that record was our first real attempt at making something that blended melody and heaviness. So where they were starting to explore kind of the signature sound. So the foundation had been laid. And while things were starting to build, they were gaining traction, there was a lot of tension in the band. There were creative differences in the band as this kind of new sound was being laid. And Dallas Taylor left the band in 2003. So that led to kind of the pivotal moment of where Underoath was going to go next and who would be the front man or the face, alongside Aaron, who was the founder and the start, which is where we get Spencer Chamberlain. So Spencer was actually born in South Carolina, not from Florida, South Carolina. And he came from a rougher childhood than what we saw with Aaron. So his parents divorced whenever he was young, and he had a very unstable home environment. And so for him, music was more of an escape, similar to the story of, Burt McCracken and the Used. Like, music became a way to express and to almost escape reality, but also processing reality. What we see in Spencer's story, even compared to Burt, is that Spencer had a harder time with the processing, but had a much better connection, I guess, to the escape. And we're going to look at that through the lyrics and the history of the band as it goes. But that all was rooted in the childhood and kind of how Spencer was raised and when he came up. He mentions in a Loudwire interview, my parents split whenever I was really little, and I was raised by a single mom who worked all the time. My brother and I had to fend for ourselves. So very much kind of on his own. And again, a lot of instability, which is important. Whenever he began to pick up music and explore kind of the musical talents that he had, he was inspired by bands like Nirvana and Alice in Chains, and he was really interested in this kind of heavier music, and even playing guitar and kind of balancing the heaviness with like the art of guitar, like these bands before him did so well. So he began to play in local bands in high school, and then just really loved that aggressive, emotionally driven music, which we hear in his voice when he joined Underoath, and then in anything he has done since. You can hear the aggression and emotion tied together, which is why we consider them to be part of this emo world, an emo core, if you will, even though there's the heaviness that isn't necessarily as easily defined as emo. So before joining Underoath, Spencer was the vocalist and guitarist for a Florida-based metalcore band, This Runs Through. So tied in to Florida in this space. Also, after Dallas Taylor left Underoath, Spencer's already in the scene. He's in Florida, the metalcore Florida scene. Underoath has an opening for a lead vocalist. Spencer auditions. And he recalls this in a Kerrang interview. I remember going into my audition thinking, there's no way I'm getting this gig, but the guys were really open to me. And after a couple of rehearsals, it just felt right. So his first major test was They're Only Chasing Safety in 2004. So this was an album that had already been started by Aaron and Luke and the Underoath band as it was. So they began They're Only Chasing Safety from what they laid as a foundation in kind of those late 90s, early 2000 years. And so Spencer comes in and joins with the creation and then the release of this album. And this was the most dramatic shift in Underoath sound because the band, Aaron's vision of pairing kind of this aggression and melody together, it really clicked with Spencer and Aaron. Spencer had the aggression, the emotion, the energy that was needed to perfectly match Aaron's kind of melodic softness, clean vocal sound, which gave Underoath this kind of perfect secret sauce that fans grasped and held on to. So with this album, we have songs that are iconic to this day, including Reinventing or Exit, A Boy Brushed Red, Living in Black and White. And this was truly the starting line and the catalyst to Underoath's mainstream success. Spencer said in an alternative press interview around this time that that record blew up way bigger than any of us expected. One day we were playing to 200 kids, and the next we were on work tour in front of thousands. This was a huge, huge shift in what these teenagers, they were kids at the time, had experienced in their lifetime, and opened the door to their creativity to run wild, but also for chaos to ensue and for tensions and what normally happens for teens going into their adult years, growth, but in a very unstable environment. This band was considered a Christian band, but was playing in spaces that were not traditionally Christian spaces. And they would start their shows with, we're doing this for Jesus Christ, and this is why we're here. But the reality was the band wasn't necessarily fully like drenched or following their Christian faith as much as they were clinging to that as a foundation, but leaning more into these alternative secular, if you will, spaces, which becomes a thread throughout the years that follow and the Underoath that we know today. All right, so They're Only Chasing Safety completely blew up. They're redefining the genre, they're redefining their space, they're redefining what their sound would be. They are laying a foundation for their success, and they sold over 500,000 copies, which led to them being a name that was known and recognized. And that was the open door into their next album, Define the Great Line. In a more recent 2024 interview, Spencer, was talking about this step from They're Only Chasing Safety into Define the Great Line. And because we're celebrating that right now, right? There was the 20-year celebration. And Spencer said lyrics from Define the Great Line and beyond came from more personal experiences and pain compared to They're Only Chasing Safety, which came from kids trying to figure out how to make music others would love. So when we start to see this transition from one album to the next, we're also seeing a transition in the band members and their influence on their music. They're Only Chasing Safety was meant to be something that people grasped, something that would be on the radio, something that would be a hit, a success. Whereas Define the Great Line was more true to what the members were experiencing, what they cared about, the things that they were going through, and that kind of rawness and truth, honesty, the vulnerability that we see in the emo music that we love went from them becoming successful to becoming legends in this space. So Define the Great Line was released in 2006. It debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, which was completely unheard of for a metalcore band at the time. They were unique and they figured it out, how to blend the mainstream with this kind of underground space. It was heavier, it was darker, it was more experimental, and it featured more kind of intricate songwriting with that raw emotional intensity. So this is where we got Writing on the Walls in regards to myself. And this, the way that they wrote the music was to showcase more clearly and more, I guess, to another level, this softness and melody of Aaron compared to the aggression and raw intensity of Spencer. Spencer said, we didn't want to make They're Only Chasing Safety Part 2. We wanted to challenge ourselves. That album was us stepping into our own. And it worked because at this point, Underoath was one of the biggest names in heavy music. They played sold out tours. They were dominating festivals like Warped Tour, but behind the scenes, everything was falling apart. And by 2009, the cracks in Underoath became something that the band members and even the fans couldn't ignore. So as the band skyrocketed to success with the 2006 Define the Great Line album, moving into their next album, Lost in the Sound of Separation in 2008, Spencer was battling a very secret and private drug addiction due to the pressures of touring constantly, some unresolved personal trauma, how he was raised, not really addressing kind of those demons that followed him since childhood. It became too much. And this was another escape. Music was no longer enough as the escape. He added, more escape on, and things were available. In an interview, kind of looking back with Revolver, he says, I was using anything I could to get my hands on just to function. At one point, I was so out of it that I thought I was going to die. He says, I was lost. I didn't know who I was without Underoath, and I didn't think I had a future. And a big part of this was also linked to the faith in Christianity side of things. This was the time where the band was still considered a Christian band. They were Christian members in a band in this other scene. And, they would communicate it as like a ministry and, sharing Jesus with, these different crowds. But the members were all struggling in their own way with their faith. And Spencer, even like to the extreme, and he, was battling this addiction, struggling with his faith because they proclaimed Christianity. He mentions this later on in life, but looking back, these were groups of people that were the most judgmental, the least forgiving. And he knew that if he was honest about the things he was struggling with, there would be a divide from this group of people because the beliefs didn't match. And he was positioned as this leader for Christian kids when he was a kid struggling himself in, from an unstable environment and then currently in an unstable environment. So it was the perfect setup for failure. And for him, it was extremely isolating where there wasn't a lot of options beyond chaos and ultimate destruction, which could have been death for him, or what we did see, the death of Underoath. So because of his addiction, because of everything going on, there were a lot of tensions in the group. And by the time that the band released another big album, Disambiguation in 2010, Aaron was gone. He was not part of the band. He was not part of that album release. And it was clear that everything was unraveling. And this is where Aaron's struggles really came into the picture because Spencer wasn't the only one struggling. Aaron, who founded the band, started the band, was such a core member of the band, was also struggling. He felt alienated. And, he, like Spencer, was struggling with his faith, was being judged, was struggling privately. There were a lot of things that were at odds with each other. He wasn't sure if he believed any of those things before. Like he was, in a place where he would then be kind of burning those beliefs to the ground and rebuilding them. Aaron was the most openly Christian member of the band. And he found himself at odds with the band's changing views. He mentioned in a Rock Sound interview, I felt like I didn't belong anymore. It wasn't anyone's fault, but I was growing in a different direction. And so he shocked all fans in 2010 by completely leaving Underoath. and going in his own solo direction. He says to Revolver, I just knew I had to go. I needed to figure out who I was outside of Underoath. And that's where he kind of built off of his solo projects that he had already started while he was in Underoath. So the Almost was one of his biggest side projects that he started in 2005. And he was the front man. They released their debut album, Southern Weather, in 2007. Say the Sooner being a huge hit and kind of proving that he could lead a band, he could be a frontman. And as he left Underoath, he spent more time on the Almost, but he also gained a new opportunity and he became a drummer for Paramore on their 2013 tour. He said that they called him out of nowhere and they were like, hey, do you want to play drums for Paramore? And he was like, yes. And so he was able to leave Underoath, go on tour with Paramore. He released Anthem Song, which was his first solo worship album, which was a very big difference, dramatic departure away from Underoath's intensity, which showed more of his kind of softer, introspective side, his songwriting, kind of showcasing maybe where he was at and what he was wanting creatively compared to what was happening within Underoath in the band. Underoath kind of shifted without him on Disambiguation, which was released in 2010. And it was even darker, even moodier, more atmospheric. It was a little rough and was missing some of that kind of soft melody that Aaron brought to the band. Now, during this time, Spencer, in an interview with Rock Sound, said, we were just exhausted. We'd spent years on the road, constantly writing, touring, and dealing with personal demons. It took a toll. And that was clearly shown through the Disambiguation era. So by 2013, Underoath officially called it quits. They did a final farewell tour and they even released a documentary kind of throughout this tour and wrapping up their time as a band and, bringing things to a close as well as they could. That was called Tired Violence. And I recently watched this and it was really interesting, hearing them talk about it. This was a time where Spencer was becoming a little bit more honest about some of the things that he had struggled with, not completely, but there were clear conversations around how the band was not getting along. They interviewed Spencer in the documentary and then they interviewed some of the other band members like Tim. And there was a clear difference between the members that were married, starting families, again, in a little bit more of a stable place, who wanted to spend more time with their families and honor that compared to the music and the touring and, the chaos of being on the road. Whereas Spencer didn't have that and wanted to tour and keep putting the music first. And so they were at odds with each other. One of the core pieces of their sound was gone. They were being ridiculed often, about how they were just known for their old music and that their new stuff wasn't necessarily connecting as much. And so they brought up the question of, are you guys going to just go into your 40s and 50s touring the same songs you've been touring for years? Like, how long can you keep doing the same thing over and over, especially if you're not actually enjoying it, if things aren't good, if, the band isn't even actually a family or a team anymore? Like, how can you keep doing this? And so they decided that it was time to end it, which left fans heartbroken, but did open up a space for the band members themselves to heal apart from each other and come back together even stronger, as we are seeing today. So during this time, Spencer didn't step away from music. He did his own solo project called Sleepwave, which was more in the alternative rock space. He moved away from metalcore and had a chance to kind of redefine himself and explore music that wasn't as clearly tied to his past and what he had been known for. So giving him an opportunity to kind of wipe the slate clean in a way and experience himself in music in a new way. And because of his struggles with faith and what Underoath was known for and kind of what fans expected, it seemed to kind of be a catalyst for his own healing and recovery and figuring out who he was so he could be stable. So Sleepwave did produce an album in 2014 called Broken Compass, and it was somewhat well received, but never really reached the heights of Underoath. And Spencer later admitted that he felt disconnected from the project. He really wanted to figure out who he was, and there still was a tie and a love for Underoath, but he needed to heal in order to be reconnected to that, which is where he began to kind of rebuild his faith, address the addiction, become sober, kind of get his life together and become a more stable version of himself, while other band members also had a chance to step away, breathe, and then come back together, which is where the resurrection started in 2015. This is when Underoath announced their reunion with Aaron Gillespie rejoining the band. And they went on a comeback tour, which was a massive success. So really showing that their connection to their fan base was still there. Their fans still existed. They were ready for what was coming next. They were ready to experience Underoath again. And they, were fully connected to it, no matter what heartbreak they went through with the breakup. So in 2018, they released an album called Erase Me, which was their first album in nearly a decade. And it was their first one that they defined as not having a Christian message. So the shift was meant to kind of open new doors for all band members to start exploring their own creativity, create music that they actually connected with and that they loved, and showcase how the members themselves had kind of grown away from that box that they were defined in the early days, especially, Spencer. Fans had a mixed reaction to this shift because it was pretty strong, especially those who were still in more of the Christian space and leaned on them for kind of that influence. But, Aaron, in an interview with Revolver, he said, we're not the same people we were in 2004. This is us being honest about who we are now. And at this time, Spencer interviewed with Alternative Press and said, I don't consider myself religious anymore, but I do believe in hope and redemption. And this band saved my life. He also said in an interview with Kerrang, I'm finally at peace with who I am. I love making music again, and I love being in this band. So this 2018, revival of their music, while fans didn't necessarily know fully what to do with it, the band members were more connected and felt a little bit more centered in their own values and what they believed, which kind of paved the way for like the second wave of Underoath that was deeply emotional, vulnerable, and honest, which we know, as fans, that there's so much more connection from that place. So that led to 2022, where they released Voyeurist. And this is where they really wanted to push more boundaries. They began blending more electronic influences with that aggression and melody that they already had. And then this has kind of fed into this new era, which is the 2025 album that is soon to be fully released, called The Place After This One. And this album is unique because in a recent interview with Alternative Press, Spencer said that Underoath behind the scenes hasn't been fun for a long time. He said even since 2006, when they were working on Define the Great Line. He said that writing and putting together albums came with a lot of tension and fighting. He found himself dreading it. But things shifted prior to the new album. The band learned how to communicate more clearly, how to work together as a team to make something that every member would be happy with. And it truly feels like a new era of Underoath. The band mentioned, I think Aaron mentioned this in that interview, that they hadn't actually written an album fully together until this album. Like they wrote songs separately because things were too tense. They mentioned, someone's going to punch a hole through the wall. Like they're going to have to separate, come back together. Like they weren't all getting along. And the final creation of the album came with songs that some members hated, some members loved. And it led to even tension in their performances and how they could connect to the songs they loved, knowing that another member of the band hated it and didn't like it. Whereas this album, The Place After This One, they rented a cabin in the mountains, I believe in North Carolina, the Blue Ridge Mountains. And they all just stayed together as a family, as friends, and wrote this album fully together. And Spencer kind of looked back on it. He said whenever they played the album through, like they finished the cuts of it before all final editing, it felt like the first time where every member was proud and happy with what they created. And they decided that that mattered, like the art of the music, their pride in it, their connection to it, their connection to each other mattered more than any external success, the numbers, the money, the tours, whatever would follow. And they were excited this got to be that album. And they, even though they've been celebrating, the anniversary tour of They're Only Chasing Safety, there's been this underlying excitement and anticipation for this new era, which now leads us to Locus Ultra. I'm sporting today. So Locus Ultra, they showed up on social media on Instagram January 11th with their first post, and it said Q1 2025 in the caption. In January 16, they posted their sightings for February on tour with Norma Jean, 3 shows in Florida, 3 days in a row. January 24th, they posted a quote photo that said, Locus Ultra exists in a dream state of unconsciousness, living in the thin space between a dream and sleep paralysis. Very mysterious, very interesting, very red and black tones. You could see kind of faces with masks. There was a little bit of a music undertone to it. Like the editing was really interesting, but you could hear these little potential teasers in the background. And then February 5th, they show up on the Emo's Not Dead cruise, which is where we were. They were added to the lineup on a small stage. It was called the Matt Says stage. So very smaller, kind of newer bands. Some of the people on the cruise apparently already knew that this was coming. They knew who this band was because of what had been teased prior. They actually looked it up. I did not. But when this band was performing in this very small stage, we were in a room kind of around the corner. Someone comes in and says, Underoath is performing. They're in masks, but it's Underoath. We're like, what? We go, we're like, what is going on? It's Locus Ultra. It's Underoath, very clearly. They're in masks. Spencer's wearing long sleeves, full on ski mask. Some of the bands have more kind of Halloween style mask, like Aaron, and they perform an entire album front to back. Next day, they're added to the main stage on the pool deck as Locus Ultra, and they do the exact same thing. And at the end of their performance, there's a scroll, kind of Star Wars style, that shares a message, basically showcasing that they're like the gratitude that they have to be able to create art and put art out, experience the art, share the art in a way that is more kind of pure and not focus so much on the names, the popularity, whatever else can come with it. They shared that they would only be playing 5 of these shows total, 2 on the cruise, 3 in Florida with Norma Jean, and that would be it. It would be over. Very confusing to many of us, but we'll see what comes because the album is released in March, at the end of March. It will be called The Place After This One. And the singles had been released prior to Locus Ultra coming on the scene. And then after the cruise and the finale of Locus Ultra, they released another single, announced the album, started the pre-release of it. There will likely be videos of them performing these songs with the release. I'm sure there's more that will follow. Locus Ultra is not necessarily posting quite as much. Underoath finally started posting as them, but there's not a clear kind of conversation around why they did it. Even in the alternative press interview that was very recently released, this was not talked about or discussed. So I'm very curious what is going to come from that. But Locus Ultra existed, and I'm guessing, just with kind of diving more into the band, because they're so proud of it, maybe it was a way that they could just enjoy it without expectation of anything that they had done prior, kind of wiping the slate clean. Will that mean that they don't play as many of their hits, in the future? Probably not. Find the Great Line anniversaries coming up. Surely that's something that they'll dive into as well. But it does seem like their way of saying this truly is a new era. And this is how we're moving forward. And I will say it was really cool to experience the album in this way because while I didn't necessarily know every word that they were saying, we got to hear new songs that were coming, and it's different and exciting and fun. And the energy was incredible, and fans were grabbing at it like on the cruise. And it makes me more excited, which it was probably the point, just to get some excitement, some virality on what's to come from Underoath. So the place after this one is coming out in March officially. The first single was Teeth. That was released at the end of 2024, closely followed by Survivor's Guilt and Generation No Surrender. And then after Locus Ultra and the full album being announced, they released All the Love Is Gone. And that is the future, the next step that is to come from Underoath. And I think in that alternative press interview, Aaron wrapped this up really nicely. He said, a band is like a marriage. You have ups and downs, hot and heavy, and absolutely miserable times, and they all interchange on a sliding scale. It's just a thing that ebbs and flows, and the bands that last are like marriages that last. Stick with it, and it'll reward you. Give up, and you lose. So this is now their reward and ours because we get to experience it as well. And whether you want the old Underoath without more of the kind of electronic change of sound, or you're open to what is here now and what is to come, I think we can all respect the growth that the band has seen and the fact that they could have all gone their own direction, but they chose to come back together. That's something that we don't always get from these bands. And I'm excited for what's to come from them, and how like I may be able to connect to some of their music, which leads us to our wrap up, where I want to go through and kind of journey through some of their lyrics and explore where the messaging might have changed and evolved, or even having a connection to what they were experiencing, teenagers who were just trying to create something people loved. Some of the members struggling, some maybe coming from really stable homes and these more faith-based backgrounds being thrust into the spotlight as leaders in a Christian space for all Christian teens, but in a metalcore environment while struggling with success and exhaustion from having to keep up with everything that they created, to division and tension, addiction, and division within the members and their own beliefs, to breaking up, having a very public fallout, ending everything that they had created, understanding what life would be like without it, coming back to it and redefining themselves, and then having the courage to continue redefining and not just go back to what fans may have wanted or what was successful at their start. That's a lot many of us can connect with in our own ways. So early on, a boy brushed red, living in black and white from They're Only Chasing Safety. Some of the lyrics: can you feel your heartbeat racing? Can you taste the fear in her sweat? You've done this wrong. It's too far gone. These sheets tell of regret. I admit that I'm just a fool for you. I'm just a fool for you. Here's where we both go wrong. Tonight's your last chance to do exactly what you want to, and this could be my night. This is what makes me feel alive. Here's where we both go wrong. So sign me up and toss this key, because for now we're living in this moment that we both ignore the truth. It's all over. It's all over. I feel your heart against mine. So take a breath and close your eyes. Your lungs have failed and they've both stopped breathing. My heart is dead. It's way past beating. Something has gone terribly wrong. I'm scared. You're scared. We're scared of this. I never thought we'd make it out alive. I never told you, but it's all in your goodbyes. It's all in your goodbyes. Well, look who's dying now. Slit wrist, sleeping with the girl next door. I always knew you were such a sucker for that. It doesn't matter what you say. You never mattered anyway. I never mattered anyway. Very interesting song. I'm very curious whether the influence of this came from. Like, I read it a lot, which might be just too trying to like read it on the nose, but as someone who grew up in a very conservative Christian space, it seems kind of like the battle of like understanding like lust, sexual desires. Again, might be too kind of on the nose, but the feeling that you can make a mistake that would ruin your entire life, and the guilt and the shame that you should feel for exploring that, maybe any kind of desire. It's interesting looking at some of the lyrics from They're Only Chasing Safety, and then going back to that time of, even I believed like, oh yeah, they're a Christian band. Like I went to shows where they were there, with all these other kind of Christian bands. The lyrics, I don't know if they would be fully accepted by some people. I think a lot of us as kids, like that was a way to kind of slip some music into like our parents buying the CD for us, letting us go to the shows, just because they were defining themselves as Christians, but the music itself is kind of different, which is interesting. Interesting too, that it wasn't for them kind of the honest, raw, what they were even experiencing. They were literally just trying to create something that would take off. So very interesting. That brings us to Define the Great Line, where that did shift a bit in the song in regards to myself. Wake up, my God, this is not a test. And it's not too late to come clean, get it off your chest. So steady your hand before your face and concentrate. There's got to be some stable ground left to walk on. So tear another page from the book. Are you asleep or just alone? Clear this room from your lungs. Pull yourself together, man. Pull yourself together. On your back, you're sleeping in a bed of shame. Let the light breathe some new life into this room. It's what keeps you coming back, made up of insatiable taste. Bury your head in your hands and sink into yourself. Just what are you so afraid of? What are you so afraid of? You're staring truth in the face. So come on down. What are you so afraid of? You're busy living now, aren't you? You're busy making vows. You're coming unglued. Time is shorter than you know. I know the light is blinding to the naked eye. So why don't you just take steps from being alone? I swear it's not too late for you. It's all worth reaching for. It's all worth reaching for. They had to pull you out. It's all worth reaching for. And I think this clearly, has a little bit more of an undertone of where faith really does fit in a space where you feel hopeless. If you feel like you're living in a way that's not fully aligned with your own values, you're making, mistakes, however you would define that, and you're searching for kind of a way forward and through. Maybe this was influenced by some of Spencer's struggles. I don't know exactly who in the band wrote it, but I would be curious to talk about that because I think it's really interesting. But a little bit more honesty to some of that, like, okay, we're trying to keep up, we're trying to do our best, which I think so many of us, whether you come from a Christian faith or not, have probably experienced that of like, we want to be good people and do good things in the world. And sometimes it feels like we're not. And so it's that kind of internal dialogue, like, okay, there's got to be a way through this. Like, what can I cling to? How can I move forward? And then we have Disambiguation in 2010. So this is without Aaron, the song In Division. I lay in a bed of resistance chained to either side. I really wish I could reset, rewind. Someone has clawed out my eyes, can't identify. I really wish I could reset, rewind. You know it's never the way we planned it. I really wish we could reset, rewind. I'm planning a revolution inside my head. I'm planning a revolution when I break free. I call for annihilation. Describe the sunlight so I can feel its burn. If only I could get up from this bed. I don't know what they told you, but this place is not what you think. Living inside a hole, they put me underground, where they could never find me unless they dig me out. I search for the answers because this is the end. I search for the answers. God, it's caving in on me. I feel them watching, but no one seems to care anymore. I'm digging my way out because when I'm breathing, there's no release. This clearly showcases the suffocation, the exhaustion, the struggle that so many of them were going through. And this is about that time where Spencer was even saying, he looked around at people running the Christian festivals and the people running the labels, and they were the most judgmental. They were the ones that, when they weren't living necessarily according to the things that they said. And then they were also placing judgment and disconnecting from people who they viewed as doing the same things, right? Messing up, maybe not looking that certain way. The band, it was falling apart and struggling. No one was there to really provide that kind of safety or security. So very hopeless, and that's where they ended. And then coming back, from the Race Me album in 2018, we have On My Teeth. Let's get this straight. I'm fine without you. I'm not your effing prey. So save yourself and no one else. What you believe, what you believe, what you believe, your life is a lie. Get over it, get over it, get over it. You got the best of me and stabbed me in the back. I taste you on my teeth. You're like a heart attack and I'm not okay. I'm heading down the drain. I still feel safe down here where I belong. So where were you when I fell out? Went back into the dark. I'm lost again. So don't come find me. What you believe, what you believe, what you believe. Your life is a lie. Get over it, get over it, get over it. You got the best of me and stabbed me in the back. I taste you on my teeth. You're like a heart attack and I'm not okay. I'm heading down the drain. I still feel safe down here where I belong. One day you might be hungry. One day you might be hungry. You got the best of me and stabbed me in the back. I taste you on my teeth. You're like a heart attack and I'm not okay. I'm heading down the drain. I still feel safe down here where I belong. A lot more anger, a lot of aggression, less hope. I think a lot more resentment towards the people that you put them down. Did Spencer write this about Aaron? I don't know. But a lot of rejection of maybe the hope-filled message that you hear before. And then from All the Love Is Gone in 2025, prayers are useless, seeing double. Another Friday night, 3 vodkas deep, another level, effing dynamite. Money gone, vision gone. Think I'm God, love is gone. I'm not abusing anything. That shit's abusing me. Another round, delete them now. Let's go, bartender, please. All alone, it's last call again. I want another one. Don't need another one. Pull the trigger. Let's watch it end. Give me another, cuz all the love is gone. All the love is gone. Got a hole in my heart filled with nothing. I can't breathe because all the love is gone. All the love is gone. I lost my wallet, can't find my keys. My bag's been empty since 2:15. I'm sinking deep, just met the devil. I'm still going another level. I'm sinking deep, just met the devil. I'm still going another level. Money gone, vision gone. Think I'm God. Love is gone. This album and that more recent alternative press interview, Spencer even mentioned like he wrote a lot. They pulled a lot from his addiction and going through recovery. And you can hear that here. So the hopelessness of battling that addiction, being isolated and alone, and deciding like, do you move forward or not? Glad he did. But there's a lot of pain that you can feel. And anyone who's been in that place of truly feeling at the bottom, especially feeling at the bottom and controlled by an addiction or a struggle, can probably relate to that. And even in the song Survivor's Guilt, you hear how his own experience and now struggling with even making it out of a space like this, which is really interesting. I think it's connecting on a different level of the recovery has happened. So now you can go to that pain, not from a place of resentment, anger, and like that hard exterior, but there's a softness and honesty and vulnerability to it, which I think is going to bring so much more connection from Underoath. I can't wait for this tour to be announced. I will be there and I will be even more pumped after the experiences I've had, even with my Locus Ultra shirt now. After we saw the 2 shows on the boat, I messaged the Emos Not Dead Cruise Facebook community. I was like, who's going to the shows? I need the merch because they didn't sell us on the boat. Some man in Florida bought me this and sent it to me. I paid him obviously, but I feel so much more connected to the band, their future. Maybe one day we can interview them. That would be a dream. And I'm excited for what's to come. I hope you are as well. And I would love to hear stories you have, your experiences with Underoath, whether you consider them emo or not. share that if you would like. You can share that in comments, review, Instagram, email me. All of that is in the caption. And as always, if you would like to come on the show, if you have a band you want to talk about the history of, if you want to share some of your favorite experiences and moments with the emo space, what it means to you, whatever you want to talk about something, please email me. Email address in the show notes. I want to hear from you. I'm happy to let you come on. I want to talk to you because that is what this space is for. So thank you again for joining me on School of Emo. I will see you in the next class.